welcome back to the Butterfly Studio on this Friday morning, dull and a little bit drizzly. Please excuse the noise if you can hear it. Next door, just over that way, are having their windows put in, new windows completely on the front. They're almost at the end of their job, but there are obviously a few bits to finish that involve hammering large lumps of wood, so you will hear a bit of banging in the background and possibly some voices. I will do my best to edit around it if I need to, so that's fair warning for if the film suddenly looks a little bit joggy. However, you might also hear some rain. It's threatening rain. The sky is very grey and it's been a little bit drizzly, which is a bit of a shame, but you might enjoy some of the sounds of the rain that I shared on Instagram at some point. So I will welcome returning viewers. Thank you for coming back. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome to you too. I hope you can get something from this which appeals. I will cover sewing and knitting primarily. It'll be a little bit of spinning and some odd bits of information, all threaded with fibre, so let us enjoy. My last fortnight since I last saw you, it's been quite peaceful and quiet. My daughter went to Devon, as I think I mentioned in the last podcast, so she is the generator of energy and sound in the house, so even the dogs were peaceful without her. And my sons, one stays with his father a lot because they have an elderly dog that needs looking after, and the other one was with me, but I never noticed. He's desperately revising for mid-term exams when he goes back. I think they start next week. He's got, or possibly the week after, but he's head down, buckling down. He also did a bit of filming. I know he's put it on Facebook, and one of his A-levels is film studies. And his assignment was to do a short piece, no more than 2 minutes, but it was to look at the technical side of filming, so the lighting and the sound and the emotions created through filming, not necessarily performance-wise. However, he's, as I say, he put it up on his Facebook page, and it's got a lot of likes, and needless to say, his mum liked it very much. What else has happened? Nothing much really. I have actually injured my foot, and I have something called plantar fasciitis, which is the muscle, the band of muscle under your foot. It's called plantar fasciitis, fasciae something or the other. Anyway, and the condition is which affects that thick band of muscle under your foot, and it's incredibly painful. And I can only put it down to when I had that bad bite on my heel a few weeks ago when I did the garden. I can't think of any other injury, and I think it may have set a small infection up in the muscle group, and it's incredibly painful. So I've had a lot of enforced sitting down, and what does one do when one sits down? One knits, doesn't one? So I've done a lot of knitting, and serendipity stepped in there because there's a couple of knits I will show you and share with that have a time frame on them. So having to sit and knit with my hands tied down behind my back, forced, yeah, that was no hardship whatsoever. And another thing I want to mention is you can find me in all the usual places. I don't tend to mention it too much because you found me and you're watching me, or you've subscribed to me so you'll get me in terms of the podcast. And it's all the usual places for anything else. And as I say every time, it's the beady butterfly that you search for, and I come up on pretty much every social site. I do have Twitter, but I just don't do it. Facebook obviously, and Instagram, and I've just signed up to LO, which is a new app. Suddenly got a surge of interest when Instagram announced that they were going to change all their approach to what you were going to see and turn towards the dark side that is Facebook. Now, at the moment, I'm not aware of any big difference with Instagram. However, because of things develop, I wasn't aware of a huge impact with Facebook either, until such times as suddenly no one was seeing any posts unless it had no pictures, and I suspect, certain words in the text. However, so Elo, yes, I've joined it quite quickly because I wanted to get my name used, the Beady Butterfly, because of continuity. Everything else is the same. But I don't find it a very user-friendly app at this time. Maybe they'll iron out a few issues. It's very slow. It's not terribly clear unless you go on their huge, great, this is how you use my app thing. And life's too short. If I can't work it out and be instinctual with it, I'm not going to use it. However, I'm on there and there's a few pictures, but I follow more people than I use it, simply just because it's there, really. So, tea, I think, after all that waffle. We've had 6 minutes of chat and no tea. So I'm drinking today, let me reach around and get it, mint tea. It's the same mint tea that I used last time, with a little bit of green tea in it. So it's a fair trade tea. I can't find the label. Mr. Beebe's thrown it away. And we do need some more anyway. So in we go with our bubble plunge. I'll leave it on my lap for a minute. So I'm going to read to you something that I wanted to know why mint tea was considered good for you. It is considered good for you. It is one of the herbal teas that's highly recommended. And so I looked up Thomas Culpeper, who was a 15th century herbalist, and there's a huge paragraph on extolling the virtues of mint tea. However, two stuck out for me as relevant to this particular situation. I'm just going to hold that up so you can see it steeping. I hold it against the wine. And he says, it suffers not milk to curdle in the stomach, if the leaves thereof be steeped or boiled in it before you drink it. So I'm not drinking it in milk, obviously. Yeah. Mint milk. Yeah. I'm drinking it in boiled water, but... So my water's not going to curdle. And also, being smelled unto, it is good for the head and memory. So... I fear I will be smelling this a lot for my poor old head. So we'll let that steep. Place that back on that. And we'll come back to that in a little while. So, let's start with some sewing. Now, you're obviously going to have noticed I am wearing the dress. Ta-da! Here it is. I haven't got anything on underneath it because it's quite warm in here and I just decided not to. You're not going to be able to see too much. So what I will do is I will put a sequence of photographs at the end of the podcast so that I will get my son to take for me so that you can see it in motion and its fit and what have you. It came out just about the way I wanted it to. It's quite a substantial dress because of course it's 2-in-1 dresses. But the key points to note for me, its fit. As I said, I enlarged the pattern pieces under direction from the reviews. I think I allowed too much. I got a lot of spare fabric around the waist, so with a little bit of fine-tuning I've redesigned it slightly so we get a pull-in on the waist which pulls across the bodice. Now the bodice and line and the hem I'm very happy with. If I stand sideways, the front and back line is even all the way round, as is the hem. It drops very, very slightly on the sides, but I think that's largely to do with the pull-in on that I've created. So I'm sure without that pull-in it would be fine. The fabric is, at the moment, is because it's unwashed. I'm being intrigued to see how it feels when it's been washed. It feels quite substantial on me. It's not a light and floaty dress. I didn't want a light and floaty dress. I don't wear dresses very often, and I picked a dress as my first foray back into sewing after so many years, largely because of Isabel from Fluffy Fibres, who was doing that little sew along, and it inspired me slightly to get back into a bit of sewing. But it also reminded me why I don't sew very often, because it's not the process of the sewing, and indeed it's not the garment itself, it's how I feel in the garment afterwards. And I do feel very comfortable, and I'm very happy with it, and Mr. Beebe and my daughter both say it looks very nice. But I know I made it, and I think it's some kind of mental approach that just says, is it good enough, do you know? So, but I think, I'm very happy with it. The beading is very, very pretty. I'm not going to be able to get terribly close. The camera might pick it up better than I'm seeing on the screen. They're all done all the way inside, so that when I reverse it and fold back, this beading will highlight. I've chosen to put a brooch on it this time because it's not so warm. So I've closed up the flap, but I've fixed, I don't know whether you can see here, I just pull this up, I've fixed here with some hand sewing to a point just mid bust line, so that when this flap's open I get a nice V that only falls mid bust. I'm of an age now where I don't really need to display my décolletage. Thank you very much. There we go. And so when I reverse it I can flick back, or indeed wear it this way again. So overall I'd say, yeah, I'm very happy with it. Enough so that although I have a little cardigan on it at the moment, I will knit something specifically for this dress. I like the short length of this jacket cardigan. My waist is here, and of course it's an empire line bodice, and I like the pull that this allows through the waist if I do it up, but also it's short enough to leave undone and reveal that neckline, so waistline. So I will make something very similar to this. I also like its laciness, but I would want slightly longer sleeves. It's just a little bit short for me. I'd like to cover my elbows, possibly bracelet length, not full length, we'll see. I've got a fair amount of yarn. It's the Artisano lace weight. I showed it when I talked about my lucette. So yeah, that will be a future project, possibly for more towards the end of summer, so that I can wear it into the fall, or autumn as we call it. So basically that's the sewing that I've been doing and completing. Looked at a few project bags for my stall, and I'm not going to show you anything because I haven't actually put anything. It's still on paper. I am trying to design a project bag that's something different to what is out there already. There are lots of lovely project bags, and a lot of very popular, particularly focused on 2 or 3 makers, it appears, although I realise the scope is very broad. But everybody does seem to follow a format, and as lovely as it is, and I have several myself, excuse me, I wanted to try to make something different and try to bring something different into the arena. So watch this space on that. It's almost off paper stage and onto prototype to see if it actually does what I want it to do. There's a bit of a teaser there, and I know a lot of people don't like teasers, but it's only a little bit of sewing. It's nothing major. It's not that exciting. And I'll be working on a little bit of a more unusual way of fastening, not zip. I don't care for zips too much because I'm generally in a hurry to pack up, and quite often I'm not overly careful with zipping my bag back up, so I have been known to crunch a bit of yarn now and again, which is a bit annoying. So on that note, we will look at some knitting. I start my knitting, we'll have a quick look at the tea. I'm going to remove the pod. There it is. Starting to get the lovely amber colour. Let's just revive a few memory cells. Not overly strong this time. It's towards the end of the bag, and the nicer leaves have all been used, so I don't know whether the camera will pick that up, but you can see a few loose, tiny loose leaves in there. That's because we're at the end of the bag and a lot of the leaves are tiny. So I'm just going to take this out, excuse me. I don't want to dribble it too much, and I'll put that back up there. Cheers. You can definitely taste the difference between an organically grown tea, particularly mint, and an artificial or manufactured tea, which has, I fear, added flavour to enhance the experience. I would rather have a more mellow mint and know that it's real. So where should we start? I think we should start with my one and only finished item, which I surprised myself with the realisation I've only actually finished one thing, and yet I've been knitting like a demon for a fortnight. However, it is in the box, so it's obviously socks. This is Kristin's box of socks, cow. I thought I would show you it sans box. There's one pair missing. My eldest has got his on his feet today, so that's my second son, my daughter, Mr. BB. That was Snape's stockings there, and the finished migraine socks, as I'm calling them unkindly, in their little lozenge shapes. I have a pair. So pair number 1, pair number 2. How happy am I with these? Very happy. They are, they changed their fit and the feel once the surface crochet was put in. Excuse me, I'll give you an example. This is a very similar pattern. This is my son's humongous sock, and this has a much more even spread of single purl against knitted stitch. So it's obviously a very broad rib. Is your 2x2. So this, I think, was 5x1. And what you get is a nice bit of resistance on your knitting, and it stays nice and skinny tubed, but has stretch into the leg shape. What you get when you surface crochet and fill that channel is a much more formed shape. Now I've still got stretch, but the construction and feel has become much firmer. I'll hold them up together so you can see. This is quite fluid, quite floppy, just as any other sock would be. This one is obviously going to flop, but look, it does stand up on its own. Those little rods of knitting crochet. Doesn't spoil the comfort and the wear. I'm still not overly happy with that. Although off it looks like a little flower bud. If I scrunched up, it looks like a little rose. So overall, I'd say I'm very happy. I would knit them again if someone asked me to. I like the pattern without the filled channel surface crochet anyway. It's, as I say, very similar, if not identical, to that. So it's finished, it's done. They're not washed and blocked, but I have tried them on and they fit a treat. Very happy with that. The details of the yarn and the pattern, etc., will have been on last week's podcast, because I can't remember. I can't even remember what the yarn was. It's something my son bought for me for my birthday, and it's Italian yarn, but that's as much as I can remember. So we're coming on with our box of socks. I have 6 pairs in my box and 6 more to go, plus any more that I feel like making, which I'm well on my way to now. So I'm going to just switch over knitting for a second, and I'm going to talk about what I call my timeout shawl, that, if you remember, I put in timeout because I just couldn't get my head around the pattern. And it isn't obviously called timeout. It's a pattern by Jochi Locatelli, and it's called, much more lovely name, Let Your Heart Unwind. And the pattern was thus. And I picked it because I wanted a very light and airy summer wrap to wear, if not over this dress, then certainly over anything else, or to add a little bit of protection of a summer evening. So that's why I picked it. And then I started to knit it, and then I couldn't get my head into the repeat of what I thought I couldn't get my head into the repeat of the lace pattern. Now actually what it was, as it transpired, was the short row patterning comes into the lace section and it falls on a yarn over, and if you don't wrap the needle before you do your wrap and turn, that yarn over becomes lost when you do your wrap and turn. So once I realised what I was doing wrong, plain sailing from there. So I know I don't talk about my bags. It's sort of a conscious thing, if I'm honest. I have nothing against. I can't remember the word that people use, but I have nothing against encouraging others to spend their money. That's not what it's about. I just feel that I'm here to talk about my knitting, really. However, I will mention a couple of times if I can remember, and this one is worth a mention. It's a Bink Waffle. I know other people have had it. Julie from the Yarn Snob brought it to my attention. I think I first saw it on her podcast some time ago. I've had it a while now, and it's softened up. When I first got it, it was a little bit hard and resisting, and that can be a bit of a weight, but that's not a bad thing. I'm overall very happy with it. It's just a nice size for a small shawl or a pair of socks, and of course it's reversible, and the other side is this beautiful peacock feathers print. Lovely. However, I'd much rather talk about my knitting, so that is what I will do. And here is the said non-now offending item, and I'm coming on with it hugely. When I showed it to you, I had done this. This was the point at which it went into timeout, because I managed that lace section beautifully, no problems, increasing, la la la. Then came on to the bit where it's just a bit of short row work. However, gave myself a stern talking to and got on with it. And look at how beautiful this is becoming. It is very light, very floaty. I think I mentioned last week, I have high hopes of how much this will change when it goes into blocking. Look at the stretch on it. And the reason why it looks the way it does is because of the yarn I've chosen. Now I know that Mina was asked and answered on her podcast, most recent podcast, a question about first experience with shawl making, and she didn't advise, amongst other things, she didn't advise using cotton for lace work, and she's probably right, but I like to challenge the expected, so I'm using the cotton, and the yarn I'm using is a Jaipur. It's called Katia. That's your label, and it's a mercerised cotton in a lace weight, 100% cotton obviously, and I'm sure it says on here but I can't see it. Here we are, 280 metres in this 50-gram ball, and the reason why the length is shorter than normal on lace is because cotton has a bit of weight to it, so you don't get so much length for your weight. Otherwise it's the same width as any other lace thread. You could probably see it better if I hold it up against there. If I were to compare that with any other lace yarn, it would be exactly the same, but it's much heavier and creates quite a dense feel weight-wise. But the pattern is as such that I'm getting a really nice drape. The mercerised gives it a slight gloss, so that it'll be quite reflective in the sun. That's going to shimmer and shine in the sun. You probably can't see it on this dull day. And So we'll see where the blocking takes me on this. I've reached, this is the midpoint here, and I've reached the point where I would have to start to decrease. So I'm effectively here, and I've got this section here to do, but I would like some more length. I know it's going to block. If I take the midpoint, and without a stretch, it's exactly 1 arm's length to the centre. But I want it a bit longer, just a little bit, so I'm going to put an extra repeat in. So these are my repeats, and I'm going to put in 1 more of those and 1 more of those, and then I'll start the end section. So it's slightly enlarging. I've got lots of yarn, lots and lots and lots of it. It's here. So that's it in skein form. It's very pretty. And I mentioned last time that I bought a few of these at a fantastically cheap price, so I have about 4 different colourways. So I will do 4 different summer weight scarves. I'd quite like to do a stole as well, so I'm looking for patterns on that one if I can find it. So that is Pocky Locatelli's, what did we call it again? Quick, sniff the mint, let your heart unwind. Very happy with it, moving along nicely, and definitely off time out. And the shawl that I picked up, because I just was too cross with that one, was Joss by Libby Johnson. So how are you getting on, Joss? Joss has gone on a back burner, I'm afraid, because of something that's coming up in a minute. I cracked on with this shawl. I got quite far with it, and then something came up that needed a time frame to it, so she's sat on the back of the shelf. This is a picture of Joss, Libby's quite innovative new shawl, stole. I'm sure this is her most recent. I was going to check that from the last time I said that, and I haven't. However, I will show you how I'm getting on. The yarn I'm using, before we dive into where I'm at with it, is Native Yarns, which is a local yarn to this area. I'm assuming it is because I bought it in Bristol, but of course they could have just travelled in, couldn't they? But it doesn't say on the ticket. Native Yarns website, and that's the details. And the other one is the Dublin Dye Company, which is the silk and lace colour royalty. Get a lot for your money on this one. 100 grams is 800 metres. So if you think about that in terms of the mercerised cotton, it's twice as long. So 50 grams is 400 metres, and that was, I don't know, maybe not twice as long. Yeah, 500 metres you would have got on that one, wouldn't you? So here is the shawl. I'll show you these skeins. They don't look an awful lot different to the last time you saw them. And yet I have done a bucket load of knitting on it. But then that is the thing about lace, isn't it? It never moves very far. So that's the Native Yarns, and that's the Dublin Dye Company. See why that's called royalty, can't you? Very rich and royal purple. So that's it in block. Oh, and the bag I'm using is one I made myself. I have shown this before. I made it out of a couple of little scraps of fabric that I had lined and hand did with blanket stitch in a, funnily enough, mercerised cotton. This was a French vintage cotton. I like hand sewing much more than machine sewing, but the new designs I'm working on won't be hand sewn. Giving away something there. Right, Joss, out you come. Unravel. Where was I at before? I was approximately, not very far at all, was I? I was approximately there. Done about that much, I think. Making this Dr. Seuss shape. And since I've last shown it, I've done the triangle end, that she calls it, and I'm now, from that marker up, working on the long rectangle section. It keeps up. This is a fabulous pattern, and I'm not going to tell you how it's done. You have to buy the pattern and work it out yourself. But it keeps the... It's starting to form a rectangle shape, so basically you've got this, and now it's going up like that. But very cleverly, it keeps all those stripes at an angle. How does she do that? Buy the pattern and find out. It's a lovely knit. It feels really, really light. I love the way these colours are playing together. That spine running down there. I've had to tink back on a couple of occasions because you only knit it in the one colour, as you can see, and every now and again I put a little pale purple stitch in there and thought, ook, that does not belong, so I've had to tink back that line and change it. But nonetheless, and it's a knit that you can do watching television. I am not going to call it potato chip knitting. I think that undermines the value of the design. It is an easy knit at this stage, but I think potato chip's a horrid way of describing it. My opinion. Disclaimer as always. What's next? Now then, here's something that's on a time frame. Mr. BB was sat on the sofa about 3 nights ago and Amazon trawling like he does occasionally. And I don't know what to get my son for his birthday. What? Birthday? Says I. Yes, birthday on the 25th of April. What? So my stepson is, I call him my stepson. He is very knit worthy, and I made him socks at Christmas, which he genuinely, I think, loved. And so I am making him another pair. The pattern I'm using is, I've already done it once before. I made myself a pair. It's only the second ever pair of socks I made, and they were very successful. I think they were an opal yarn. Bearing in mind it's only the second pair I'd done, and I didn't want to challenge myself too much with patterning. I'm still reaffirming the structure of sock knitting, so I picked this one, vanilla socks, when it has a simple rib down the side, which gives it a better fit. It claims to in the pattern, and indeed it does. And so here is his sock. I don't have, do I have the sock label? I don't, for some strange reason. It is a fibre I bought through Amazon, funnily enough, and I was doing an Amazon trawl for some books, which I'm going to talk about later, and this popped up as a suggested buy, and it was such a good value. It's just a sock yarn, it's nothing terribly exciting. I don't have the label, I'm really sorry, and so I'm trialling the yarn on these socks. I'm also doing 2 at a time. Now Mina has just put out a video on YouTube highlighting the start of how to do 2 socks at a time. I have done it before. The very first pair of socks I made were for Mr. BB, and unbeknownst to me, I thought there must be a quick way of doing these socks. So I did them 2 at a time. Purely just fell into it by chance, really, and logic. There must be a way of doing this, and I did them. I didn't really think what I was doing or noting what I was doing, and it was a little bit of time before I then did my next pair, and I'd completely forgotten A, that I did it in the first place, and then B, how to do it. However, Mina brought out this video, and should I say, and it clarifies 1 or 2 points at which, when do you put the 2 socks onto one needle, and how do you start off, and which end's best to start, and so on and so forth. I think I've slightly gone off line with her advice, as you'll see in a minute. But brilliant little video if that's what you want to do. So the yarn I'm using, I can tell you its name. It's Hot Socks, and I'm guessing it's a German yarn. It's 75% superwash, 25% polyamide. I like these colours. I think they're quite autumny, but this young man leads a full and active life, as all young men should do, and they'll be easy to wash, and he won't have to worry about walking around without his shoes on, which I believe he does a lot. They won't get too grubby. So, show us the socks, Jane. Here they are. They're knitting up. This is my 2 at a time. At the moment they look like 2 little Indian papoose, because I'm just done the heel flap and turned the heel there, look. Now this is the point at which I think I've come offline with what one is supposed to do with 2 at a time. You cast on, it's no secret, you cast on one, put it on a spare pair of needles, cast on your other, and then put the first one back onto the needle and carry on down the leg. What you do is, if, like me, you get a flurry of, oh, I think I'm going to do something different, I haven't got to note it down, I can do it on both socks at the same time, and knowing I'm probably only doing it with this one individual pair, I haven't got to write anything down. And so they all come out the same. I can also, which I've pretty much got, barring a bit of dyeing difference, you can also match up your stripes, if that's what you choose to do. I wanted to do it for these because they are so obviously striped repeat. There's 1 or 2 differences because on this yarn, this gold is not quite as long a stretch in the yarn, so it's a little bit shorter, but you know, basically, unless he's going to stand like that, no one is going to notice. And then at the point of heel flap, you remove one sock from your circular needle and do a heel flap, and then do your other heel flap and put it back on. Now I have a strong suspicion, I don't know this because Mina didn't cover this in her video, but I have a strong suspicion the advice would be to do the gusset and then return it, so you just do the foot and the toe. But yeah, nah. I bugged it straight back on, and now I am, there's a little bit of needle management going on, but I haven't got to pick up a second sock and redo what I've already done. I have spoken before about how I only ever knit something once, and that, apart from socks, I would say is a general rule. But of course, the very fact that there are 2 means you do have to do the same thing twice, at the very least. So knitting them together, in my head, means I'm going to do it much faster. The reality is, I suspect, that there isn't an awful lot of difference, because you definitely slowed down by knitting 2 at a time. I have knit a pair of socks, it was Kyron's first pair, in 3 days. So I can knit a pair of socks in 3 days, but somehow I'm telling myself that this will be quicker. So I don't know. They've got to be done by the 25th. And although that is 10 days away, yes, 10 days away, I've got so many other things to knit as well that I feel there's a bit of a pressure to it. But I'm enjoying it. The yarn is making quite a dense feel. There's definitely a bit of weightiness to this sock. He's not got huge feet, and they do wash and block out and soften, so I'm allowing for that as well. I'm sure they'll fit fine. I'm following the exact recipe that I did, thankfully, note when I knit them for him last time. Down the side I've got various little amendments to specifically to his sizing. So there we go, that is yet another pair of socks. So what's that, 2 pairs of socks that I'm going on? It will be 2 if I show you the next pair, won't it? But I'm going to have some tea next. So let's taste this lovely mint tea. Cheers, chaps. That is so lovely. You can watch me enjoy my mint tea. Can you see my memory revitalising, my brain cells rejuvenating? Lovely. So next on the list is another pair of socks. Now, yeah, I need to state before I talk about this that the following things that I say are entirely my own opinion and do not reflect on the pattern in any way, only on the knitter. So it's this started life as a sock that everybody's doing at the moment, fine and dandy. I forget the name of the designer because I don't like the pattern. There you go, I've said it out loud. I like her structure, her sock pattern, in terms of the mechanics of producing a sock shape. Beautifully written, the count and the there's 1 or 2 tweaks, but it's not dissimilar to other sock patterns that I've done, bearing in mind I haven't done many. But there's 1 or 2 little tweaks that she's made in her process, which I like. and the sock itself, I've done one sock so far, has knit up really nicely. What I didn't like was the flower, is that what you call it, pattern. Incredibly fiddly. There was a lot of twisting of needles and dropping of stitch. I know that a lot of people are raving about it. Now, the reason why I say it's entirely down to the knitter, me, is because it's probably the yarn that I picked. What I should have started this pattern with is a much softer, more fluid knitting yarn, so that when you do the mechanics of the stitch, and there is some twisting, some people have said that they're using crochet hooks, and it's not a complicated stitch, but there is some kind of manoeuvring to it. I don't want to go into too much detail because it's a paid for pattern. I won't do it in a sock. Whether I would knit it in something else, it would look very pretty as part of a pattern in a shawl or some garment, but I would certainly not do a sock in it. It's for me far too fiddly. However, I had cast on a toe and it had no foot and leg to it and was feeling very sorry for itself. I used this pink. Now, how could you not want to carry on knitting with that pink? This is, I haven't even got a label for it. It was in my stash. I have a strong suspicion it's a king coal. I don't know. It's a 4-ply sock wool, 100% wool. This is. It's quite soft and squishy, but the colour is gorgeously pink. So having knit the toe, I didn't want to tink back that as well. So I made it up as I went along, basically. And the foot yarn is this. Now, put those two together. You can see the yumminess of it. This yarn here is a grundel. I'm sure that's not how you say it, but sounds good to me. Hot socks. Here's the label. I suspect that changes the sound of that letter. And I know my daughter's learning German. I should have asked her what it says. Grundel. I know there'll be a ch, but that's as far as it goes. Okay, so it's a superwash. What other little bits of information can we glean from here? It's a 50-gram ball, 210 metres. And the superwash wool is accompanied by its best friend, polymid. So it'll be a lovely hard-wearing sock. And as I say, I made it up as I went along. So I've gone on a little bit of a departure for me in terms of its size, but I love it. And here is my little sock. Little indeed. It's a much shorter leg length for me. Now, as you know, when I fold my socks, I like my foot and my leg to be the same length. Obviously it's not. That was a conscious choice. A, because I wanted to see what it was like to wear a sock that short. It's very comfortable. It'd be great as a summer sock, even though it's a wool sock. And also, I discovered when I had got to that point there that I had used exactly half of a 50-gram ball, or slightly less than half actually, which meant that I can get a pair of socks out of one ball of wool. I have another one, because normally you need two, don't you? But I can get a pair of socks out of one ball. And again, this was an Amazon bargain, and I paid something like £2.35p for that ball of wool. So how can you buy a pair of woolen socks? Well, you can't, can you, for £2.35, especially handmade. So that to me had a bargain written all over it. So what I have done as my design on the fly, I liked the way, I'll stick with this side for a minute, I like the way the stripes are working. There is a repeat to them, I think. I was looking, it's from purple through to purple. So there's your repeat. And they're very pretty. And I was chatting to Hannah Rose Yarns, I think she is. She's a new friend I've made on Instagram. Lovely woman. and she suggested maybe slip stitching to soften the stripe, which if they had been deeper I would have done, but because they changed, some of them changed quicker than others actually, I just felt I was going to be slip stitching too often, and I quite like the clear definition of the stripe, even though it staggers in its own change. That's under my foot, doesn't matter. So I, on every block of 4, so each stripe took up 4 rows, so that's 4 rows of purple, then 4 rows of this buttermilk yellow. In that section I did a knit 2, purl 2, and then opposite, and then opposite, and then opposite. So if you look very carefully, first row is a purl on those 2 stitches, then it's a knit, and it's a purl, and then it's a knit. And it just fell quite nicely on most occasions within its colour. It just goes off a little as the dye lot. The stripe has more dye, but it doesn't happen very often, so it generally sits on every other stripe colour. Quite like that. And the heel, I followed the rules of the pattern in terms of structure, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. That's from the pattern Fine and Dandy Socks. The cuff is different. I've done a 1x1 twisted rib cuff. And what I haven't got here, I'm just looking for where my sock has gone. It's in the box. It's a toe-up sock, and toe-up sock frilly edge. Loathed it. And I put that on Instagram, and this lovely lady, Hannah Rose Yarns, I don't know her real name, I do apologise, came up with a alternative cast off, which originated from Wool Diaries. Apparently it was given to her by Sally at Wool Diaries, and hello Sally if you watch. She suggested a slight modification on a standard cast off, and that's what I did, and look at the difference. That is positively perfect. You've got masses of stretch, possibly not as much as this, but this has no structure and form to it, so when it's just all flippy floppy, it's comfortable on, but look at that. Now if I compare that to a cuff down sock, which Snapes were, weren't they? Where are they? There they are. This is a cuff down sock. So I started on the top edge there, and I finished on the top edge there. In fact, it's possibly even nicer, isn't it? They're the same stitch count, so let's just compare the stretch. Right, this one has just slightly more, so Snape has just slightly more stretch. Turn it around the other way. Right. Do it this way, Jane. There. Just slightly. So there we go. My sock on the fly. It fits perfectly. Very happy with the fit. And it's not an innovative keep it a secret and sell it pattern. Good heavens no. But for anybody who's stuck with what to do, I like to pattern my socks all the way around the leg as well, so it goes all the way around too. Yeah, really happy. Highly recommend it as a way of livening up a vanilla sock, which effectively it is really. Don't lose count. You can definitely potato chip this. I don't mind calling this a potato chip pattern because there's no design in there at all. So do give it a go if you find yourself stuck or bored. Yeah, very happy. Okay, and we come to our final piece, which needs a little introduction all of its own, so pictures. So those pictures show something beautiful in the making, don't they? I was contacted by Mina Phillip again, who asked me to do a test knit for her. I've done 2 for her so far, and her style of pattern writing is absolutely excellent. I can't fault it in any way. Anything that you might feel you'll stumble on is clearly explained. You are given lots of clear instruction on anything that might even be remotely complicated. They're not overly complicated designs in themselves, but what you end up with is a shawl that I've done for her shawls that looks like you've taken on a huge challenge. The pattern gives great stitch count. You feel in control of what you're doing at all times, I think is what I'm saying. So I will show you in real terms what this lovely, lovely pattern looks like. She has called it, let me put my tea down so I can pick it all up and read it for you properly. It is called Budding Bluebells, and her picture shows this shawl here. The pattern will come out with a different version. If you watch her podcast, her latest podcast, she shows, this one's hanging on the wall in her studio, and she shows her new one. I believe she's wearing it. And that's what will feature in the instructions that come out for print. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I can't fault this in any way. Now, it's quite a substantial shawl, but yet it still lives in this little bag here. And this is by Threadedwithfibre, who happens to be my favourite project bag maker. I like her choice fabrics. I like that they're sturdy. It is a zip top, and I do consciously put a finger in under that zip as I pull it, because I've fallen foul of that. But it's a nice little bag, and even though it's quite small, it has pretty much a completed shawl in here. I've got just half the repeats on the lace edging left to do. Now, the yarn I picked, Pook GB. I've had it in my stash for a little while, and it's called The Infinite Sadness, which is not a name that matches the inspiration that I got from it when I started this test knit. 100 grams gives me 365 metres, and it's 100% merino with a high twist. And the yarn is just... If you could eat yarn, I'd definitely eat it. This is all I've got left. But I had 2 skeins of a gradient yarn, or an ombre, I suppose you call it. And I've been working from the outside in. When you buy them, the tags are tied to the inside pull. So it comes with your tag attached to your inside pull. But the way I wanted my shawl to look, I didn't want to start with the pale, I wanted to start with the darker, so I've been knitting from the outside. And I've used up, obviously, all the dark shade, and I've ended up with these 2 light centres, which are more than enough to finish my shawl. She's made a couple of adaptations to the pattern which work in my favour in terms of what I'm doing with this yarn. So I should finish with this almost clear pale. The variegation, I think you can probably see that better. It almost goes to the clearer. You lose this sort of soft lilac, and you end up with this very, very, very pale off-white centre. And so here it is in all its glory. Pulling out all these needles here, there and everywhere. There we go. So I started down there at the bottom, obviously, and that really lovely rich purple lilac, I don't know what you'd call that. Deep, the depth of colour in that. Still a little bit of lighter colour in there, just so it doesn't become a heavy block. And the stitch pattern that plays across there picks up those small colour flecks really well. Now, Mina described that as flower buds in one of her podcasts, and she's quite right, and that is what I saw even before I fully appreciated what I was knitting. And my ombre, because I'm doing 2 at a time, I've got a really nice bit of weight of the darker colour, and this coming up through in a very soft colour change and ending up in the lace pattern here in the paler. I have added beads because I like beads in my shawls, and so the effect that I was trying to, well, the picture I painted in my mind as I was knitting, I think, because it isn't something I started out with, is what I feel this yarn has achieved for me is like the blossoming of a flower, where you, when it is a young bud, it has its full depth of colour, and as it blossoms through and the sun shines upon it, the colours start to fade, and like old roses, they start off with this beautiful depth of colour, and by the time the blossom has reached its full life, it's become quite pale and powdery almost. And so as my shawl develops up through, the colour fades up, and I'll end up with this very, very, very pale edge to it, like a petal that is reaching the end of its bloom. And the beads, they never show up very well on camera, I know, but as the sun plays on those beads, like little raindrops that have been left on the petals after a shower of rain. They're glass, clear glass, but the centres have a purple lining, so that in certain lights they look quite pale, and then in other lights you get a depth of colour as a raindrop highlights the colour it sits on. So there we go, the size that I'm achieving so far, and this is without full stretch. This is a 100 centimetre cable needle, and I have my finger tip on one end of each needle so that the stitches don't fall off, and that is exactly my arm's length, my arm span, and it is not by any stretch of the imagination stretched. So this is going to be a beautifully large shawl, and when that lace blocks through, it's going to be so pretty. She's a clever girl, that Mina. So I'm enjoying this test knit, thoroughly enjoying this test knit. The yarn, highly recommend. Of course it's 100% merino, which you can clearly feel in the movement and the softness. I would not hesitate to wear this against my skin, and I am very reactive to wool, as you know. Isn't that lovely? It's a really good picture of the colour change there. So I've got about that much left to do, and then the cast off, and then it will be complete. When this one comes out, I can't recommend it enough. Beautiful pattern, beautifully written, a pleasure to knit, and almost without the pattern in front of you once you get into the rhythmic knit. I think that's a good way of describing Mina's patterns. They're always very rhythmic. I always enjoy doing those. So that covers really all my knitting. It's quite a lot. I have spent most of my time on that test knit because that has a time frame to it that is imminent actually, but I should reach it okay, and thoroughly enjoyed them all. So next time when I do podcast, I reckon apart from perhaps Joss, I should be able to show you a few more finished objects. So I will finish today with a few loose threads to tie up for you. So, finishing today, first of all I'm going to do a little bit of a book review. I did one a couple of podcasts ago, or was it last time? Can't remember. And as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I was trawling Amazon looking at books like I do. I like to buy books that are second-hand or nearly new, or sometimes they're just a new owner but they've never actually been used. it can be a risk, and so far I have had no issues whatsoever. I think there was one book where the cover had a bit of a crease down the back that wasn't mentioned, but gosh, in my house and in a well-thumbed book, doesn't really matter. So I bought a couple of books that are now in their new home with me. The first one I saw on another podcast, Intuit Knit. Yes, I think that's what it's called. And she had knitted a wrist cuff out of this. Very simple. She'd never done lace before and wanted to give it a go. So she did the gateway cuff, which is quite pretty. I quite liked it. And the cover of the book interested me enough to go onto Amazon and have a look and see. Now, they do look inside me on a lot of books, and indeed did on this one. And it talked about how the book covers lace work, primarily, I would say primarily lace work. There's a little bit of variation here and there. And it does items from a lace beginner through to someone with more experience. Now, I personally would consider myself to have more experience. So I was largely looking for patterns that had something different about them. And I'm not disappointed with the book. For starters, there's this lovely pair of socks. I call them the Traversus socks, which I rather like the look of, where it combines two different knitting patterns. So I think that might be something that I will do at a future date. And lots of nice little things in here. Probably too many for me to pick. Nice hat, the Gyrus Tam. Lots of very interesting stitch patterning going on there. Nice crown to it. So that might be something that I'd have a look at. But towards the back of the book, it talks about beads. Now, and this is largely why I bought the book. I do like beading in my shawl knitting particularly, but, you know, why not put beads in anything? So there's quite an extensive description about how to attach beads into your knitting, what type of beads to buy, how to match them to your yarn, and all sorts of nice little tidbits, which after the amount of lace knitting I've done with beads, I'm fairly confident with now. But it does have a few interesting little patterns. I did like the look of this, which I thought was an intriguing pattern. I'm hoping there's not too much reflection on that. Little neck piece. Now, with some more design to that, I can definitely see myself doing something on those lines. Very interesting. And then there's adding beads, why not, to gloves and hats. Now, I know, Eva, from the charm of it, you've done some beading on gloves and hats as well, haven't you? I think it's a lovely idea, particularly the hat. I walk dogs, and I'm not sure that beads would be very helpful. I like fingerless mittens when I walk the dogs, and I'm not sure that beads would take the strain of the leads. One of my dogs is a puppy, and he does pull a lot. So I probably wouldn't put them on the gloves. But the thing that I wanted to show you, really, before I go too far onto this book, is this. Trying to find it. It is called, it's got quite a complex name, Eladen Phobius. Now she knits it here. This was the first time she talks about designing it. And it is a cowl, basically, that sits across the shoulder. And then she did this version. Now, it's not a very good picture, so I'm going to zoom in onto the picture that introduces the beading section, because it gives a lovely detailed photograph of it. And this is one of my next projects coming up. And you can see that it's a cowl scarf. This is longer than the cream one that was in the other picture, and it's joined together here, which I'm not 100% sure how yet because I haven't read the pattern. But it has lengths of bead added. Now it takes an extraordinarily large amount of beads, something in the region of 4,000 beads in this shawl scarf, which is going to make it quite weighty, but I'm going for it. So I have my beads. Don't happen to hand show you, I don't think. Yes, I do. There we are. I have a humongous bag of beads. There's nearly 5,000 beads in here, believe it or not. I am doing it in green, funnily enough, the shawl. Don't have the wool to hand though, unfortunately. But those are the beads. They're quite small, they're size 6, and I will apply them. The pattern on this occasion is to thread your beads prior to your knitting. So I will have a mammoth threading session. Don't do too many beads in one go because the friction of moving all those beads up and down your yarn can be quite devastating. So that's one of my projects to come. Great little book to use. And the other book that I'm going to quickly talk about, not in too much detail because I haven't looked at it yet, it only came yesterday. And this is Nikki Epstein's Knitting Block by Block. And I bought this simply because of that picture on the front cover. That has everything about knitting that I love. It has beading and it has structure and quirkiness, and effectively the book starts with some very basic squares. It's a beautiful visual treat, the book itself. I wish you could be behind me flicking through this, but you are given lots of beautiful pictures of squares and stitch styles, some very, very unusual ones. And you start with this selection of photographs of your squares. I just love the idea of a picture frame of your knitting. And then it takes every square and gives written instructions on how to produce each square. And within the book there are some projects to do, which I will just very quickly flick through a couple. That's all made of squares sewn together. There's a blanket, hat and scarf. I love that dinosaur scarf there. Very beautiful lace wrap, which is also buttons up cleverly to make a cardigan. There's another jacket there, and another afghan, little tops, bags, hats, little softies, and then it finishes up with some more technical work. So I would highly recommend this for someone who is keen to expand their blanket knitting, go beyond the mitered square, shall we say. There is life beyond a mitered square. Look at that. That is an afghan. How would you not want to make something as texturally beautiful as that? Your favourite colour palette. Lovely soft cotton. Bring back the afghan. That's what I say. Take away the mitered square. Not that I'm biased or anything. So that's 2 recommended books for you. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some spinning, very, very briefly, because I haven't done an awful lot, so I've done so much knitting. Some time ago, I bought some fibre from Spin City and a new spindle because the dog had chewed the old one. And in my package, she put a small sample of faux cashmere, and I wanted to spin it and ply it, see how it would ply as a completely different type of fibre to wool. And so I spun up a small free sample from fondant fibre as well and plied the 2 together, and this is what I came up with. I managed to get 110 metres out of these tiny little samples plied together, and in fact there's a little bit of the wool left over. It's going to be hard to explain which is the faux cashmere and which is the fondant fibre wool. Essentially throughout, the fondant fibre pretty much kept its colour, and it is the very pale peach that you can see in there. and all other colours are from the faux cashmere. Now the interesting thing, I've achieved obviously a lace weight out of this to have got so much length, and I have washed it, and I only did it last night, so there's still a slight dampness to it. What's interesting, now applying is not my favourite pastime, and I'm still struggling to get a perfect apply. It is getting better, and barber poling is very unforgiving of uneven plying. But what's interesting is that you can very clearly see the two different fibres, I think. I don't know how well focused that will become. If I take my face out of the shot, maybe. Let's try that. I don't know. I can't make up my mind. It's lovely and soft. There's not a lot of spring in it. It's quite rigid. When I applied the faux cashmere, there wasn't anything in it. So what it's done is it's taken away the wool qualities of the wool, in my opinion. Now bear in mind that it's only as good as the spinner, and that's me, and I am not an expert spinner by any stretch of the imagination. I will make something with it to see how it knits next. Just a little something, there's not very much meterage here. Possibly even only a test square. I don't know. It's not overly great on colour either, but again, that's down to what I picked to ply it with. I just didn't use tiny little samples of something. It was an experience, and it spun very, very easily on the spindle, and it was very easy to achieve a very fine thread. So that is that done and shown you the results. Next time you see it, it will be knitted into something, and I'll let you know how that feels and what I would actually use it for as a fibre and a yarn afterwards. And then the other piece of spinning that I did, much to my young puppy's annoyance, because it is now no longer available for him to chew, is the alpaca that Mr. Beebe bought for my birthday. It's been waiting to be spun for quite some time, and again I only washed this last night, so this is really still got a lot of drying to do. But, and this isn't all of the fibre either, I've used about 3/4 of it, and I have got 365 metres, and it is probably a fingering weight. I think it's not a DK. So this is so soft, so soft, and very squishy. So it's a completely natural state. So we have quite a natural colouring. There is white flecks to it, which when you knit up is going to look very pretty. My spinning is coming on. My spinning actually is fine. I did this on the wheel. Little thick and thin where the alpaca fibre had its natural tuftiness. So for instance, just here, that was a natural slub, if you like, in the fleece and in the prep. So when I drafted it, it just wouldn't split apart. So there's a little bit of thick and thin. My plying is the thing that is affecting the quality of what I achieve most. It's not too bad. It's not that ropey. There's a little bit of ropiness going on here, but not hard ropiness. That's where two thin sections would have come together. Serendipity played a part, and my thins and thicks married their opposites nicely, and only in one or two places did the thin meet the thin and the thick meet the thick. So I have generally an overall decent yarn throughout, just one or two slubs here and there. And as I have only done 3/4 of it, I have probably we'll be able to achieve another 100 metres, in which case I'll have achieved over 450 metres from that fibre, and will be more than enough to make something quite substantial. What I will make from it, I don't know. I may even, sacrilege saying this really, I may even experiment with a bit of over-dyeing. I don't know. Possibly keep this and over-dye the smaller section and then combine the two. I'd quite like to have some chocolatey brown depth in there. We'll see. So that's spinning completed and squeezed into my very, very busy week. I will also mention I'm doing another test knit for Libby Johnson. I did her mindful shawl some time ago, and her pattern writing again is beautifully clear. Joss, my shawl that I've shown you, is one of hers. I have no other details on it as yet. I had the email this morning, but I will share that with you next time. I believe I'm allowed to share that on social media, so hopefully I will share that with you. And the other thing I wanted to mention was John Arbon's Open Mill weekend, which is on the 14th and 15th of May. He has a mill in South Molton, which is somewhere at the top of Devon, Dorset and Devon, and he opens his mill once or twice a year. I know that it's been mentioned by Little Bobbins, I believe she went, and a couple of other podcasters have mentioned it in the past. I'm hoping to go there this time. Mr. Beebe has promised me a day out, so it's a couple of hours to get there from here, and I look forward to sharing some photographs of that with you as a nice trip. If you can get there too, that would be lovely. We think we'll go on the Saturday. My daughter does riding, so and my sons will look after the dogs. They welcome dogs, but we want to do a dog-free trip for a change. So they will dog sit, and my daughter will be riding, so we will fit the visit in while she's doing that. And so that winds up my stories threaded with fibre. My finishing piece today is not a did you know. A friend of mine, she actually plays cello with Mr. Beebe, who they're doing some classical work together, and she gave me a little gift, and her message back to me was, I saw this and thought of you, and it was very, very sweet of her, and something that I felt should be shared with you people. And it's the Dorset button. I have never done a Dorset button before, and she bought me this little gift, and in it you get an instruction sheet, some rings, a tapestry needle and thread. And so if I very carefully take out, there's the thread. It's a single ply cotton. It is an embroidery thread, essentially, DMC, but it's single ply, so you don't split it like you would in a cross stitch, a thread. And you get a little packet of brass rings, which these are quite small, but this technique can be applied on any size ring. I have got some larger rings up there which are probably 4 times the size. You get your needle, and I have made a Dorset button, which I will endeavour to show you. There we are. That's the front of the button. And then the back looks like that. Now I could have packed it tighter, but it would have meant using a new piece of thread, and I didn't want to. So as it's just an example of a Dorset button, I just left it there. Would have packed a bit tighter down here. But it's such a sweet little story. It started as a love story. I'm going to actually read just a little bit off the back of this pamphlet, because this is such a sweet story. Abraham Case, a professional soldier from the Cotswolds, fell in love and eventually married a local girl from Wardar, near Tisbury in Wiltshire, around 1622. They set up home in Shaftesbury and started the Dorset button industry. The high top was Abraham's first button. They were used for gentlemen's waistcoats and the bodices of ladies' dresses. Dorset knob followed the high top. By the end of the 1700s, 4,000 men, women and children were employed making buttons. It is said that a good worker could produce 7 dozen buttons a day. The end of the Dorset button industry was gradual during the 1800s after the introduction of a button machine in 1825. John Aston's button machine was in production by 1841 and exhibited 10 years later at the Great Exhibition in 1851. In 1904, Dowager Florence Lady Lees revived the industry and set up a mission making Dorset buttons at Litchett Minster. In 1908, these buttons were in full production, but unfortunately World War I ended this enterprise. And button making, Dorset button making, is now considered, I suppose one would say, a cottage craft. People do them. I've seen a number of Dorset buttons for sale at various crafts markets in Cornwall, Devon, holiday places like that. And I would imagine that there are YouTube videos out there detailing how to make it. It is very, very easy to do, this particular cartwheel button. But I do know that the intricacies of the Dorset button in its various forms are an art form. But what I will do, hopefully, is incorporate this in my new sewing project, yet to be unveiled. So look out for Dorset buttons. Certainly this simplistic one as part of my new project bag. And so with that I will leave you, and I hope that you have fun and pleasure in the next fortnight, that your works give you joy, and I look forward to you coming back again. Take care.